Hello, everyone. This is Diane Rasmussen McAdie with UK Column News. I'm really happy to be joined today by Lynda Wharton. She is from the Health Forum New Zealand, so the other side of the world for us, but obviously experienced some very similar things to what we experienced here in the UK for the last 5 years. And so with that, I think I would just like to pass it over to Lynda. Lynda, if you would just mind introducing yourself and where you come from, and how did you find UK Column as well, being all the way on the other side of the world?
Okay, hi Diane. It's so wonderful to finally be speaking with you because it has been a long-held dream of mine to be able to be on UK Column News and to share the New Zealand situation with your viewers all over the world. So I'm from England originally, but I moved to New Zealand as a child. I was 15 when I came here with my mum and dad. And my dad was in the British Army and then was offered a position in the New Zealand Army, and we immigrated. So I'm well and truly a Kiwi, being in my 60s now and having moved here when I was 15. So, yes, I'm very interested in England and obviously UK Column News. Actually, a lot of awake New Zealanders are aware of UK Column News, and many of us, thousands of the members in the Health Forum, actually followed the work of UK Column through the height of the New Zealand restrictions and the difficulty in New Zealand in accessing genuine information that wasn't propaganda. So you have got a big following in New Zealand, as far as I'm aware.
That's really great to hear.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? With online work, you really have no idea who your audience is, and they're from every corner of the world, which is really exciting. It's a great opportunity that we've got. So a little bit about me. Well, kind of my life is pre-COVID and post-COVID, or pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. So my pre-pandemic life was very stable, very happy. I'm married in a long-term marriage, and it's a second marriage, but we've been together for 16 years now, and I'm mum and stepmom to six daughters, all grown up, and I've got eight grandchildren. So family is used to be, still is, the center of my life. And prior to the pandemic, my career for the last 35 years was sort of a two-pronged career because I had my own holistic women's health clinic where I worked as a sole practitioner, as a registered traditional Chinese acupuncturist and naturopath, specializing in holistic women's health. That was my passion, it was my calling. And alongside that, I had an equally lengthy and enjoyable career as a freelance health researcher and journalist. So I worked for a lot of magazines and newspapers in New Zealand and Australia as a freelance health journalist. And I'm also the author of three holistic women's health books, all of which are now out of print. That was several years ago. So that was my background pre-pandemic. And I'm telling you that so that you can understand the life experience that I came from. And so with that background, I obviously watched the development of the vaccines, which from here on in we'll call the injectables because they're clearly not vaccines. But I watched the development of that with great interest, obviously, having researched and written about other vaccines, real vaccines. As a freelance journalist, I'd written a series on flu, MMR, shingles, and Gardasil. So I had some idea of what was involved in the research and development for a traditional vaccine, knowing it was somewhere between, 8 and up to 15 years from the concept to the product being authorized. Therefore, I could easily spot the differences between this playbook and, what had been medical practice up until now. And and so it was that awareness and the contrast that alerted me to the fact that we were seeing something unprecedented and potentially with serious problems, which turned out to be true, of course.
Right, right. So if we go back into 2020, which I hate to do, but unfortunately we have to do this, when we're talking about the vaccines and, or I'm sorry, as you did vaccines and what that meant for the world, especially in Western countries. I think all of us were watching the leaders that were basically working in lockstep at the time, right? And they were all saying the same things. They all had the same agenda, and it all happened at exactly the same time, as though suddenly whatever this thing was, apparently, according to them, just, you know, flew out of China and flew all over the world immediately. And suddenly we all had to stay at home, right? Or as we saw with Boris Johnson, you must stay at home. And I will never forget that moment on TV when he slammed his fist on the desk at 10 Downing Street, right? So what was it like in New Zealand at the time? Because I was watching New Zealand, Canada, Australia in particular as being even more draconian than it was here in the UK. So what was that like at that point for you?
I would say yes, we were definitely more draconian. So in 2020, when everything kicked off, we had a Labour government in New Zealand, and our esteemed leader was the now infamous and world famous female Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And it's a tale of two halves now with Jacinda Ardern, because I see the international publicity where she's worshipped and adored and bestowed with all kinds of honorary awards. And for many people, that is not how we feel about her in New Zealand. But we can come back to that. We can talk about that. So she was our prime minister, and we had a policy. She had a policy: go early, go hard, and boy, did they mean it. So we very quickly capitalized on the fact that we are a very remote island surrounded, completely on all sides by the ocean. We're not attached to any other landmass. And so very quickly our policy was to shut down the borders, call the nationals home, give them a very small window of time to get back into New Zealand, shut the borders. And we became Fortress New Zealand for the longest time. And actually, many New Zealanders who hadn't been able to get back in that short window of time ended up being locked out of New Zealand for up to 2 years, unable to return. So besides locking the borders, we the main principle was to shut the borders and then lock the nationals down. So lock the community down. I think they were called lockdowns in the UK. They were called lockdowns here. And they were literally that. Just everything stopped. All services stopped except essential services like, food, shopping, pharmacies, and medical care. Basically, everything else shut down, and we were told to stay home. Auckland, over the period of the active COVID response, which lasted a couple of years, Auckland was hit the hardest of all with lockdowns, and many New Zealand businesses, and in particular Auckland businesses, have gone to the wall. So that was the start of our response: go early, go hard. I think the same playbook, just about all the Western countries that I'm aware of, the developed Western nations, we all appeared to have the same playbook. Later on in our response, we can talk about, in came employment mandates, COVID vaccination mandates, and in came COVID vaccine passes as well. So you basically had to have a pass to partake in life once we came out of lockdown. So we can talk more about that if you want to. So it was a very, very severe draconian response in New Zealand. largely because this was the rationale that was portrayed to the people anyway, largely because our healthcare infrastructure in New Zealand is actually quite poor in terms of high dependency unit and intensive care unit care. We have got one of the lowest beds per capita in the developed world in New Zealand. And so that was the rationale for going hard, going early. If COVID was left to rip through our population, we simply didn't have you know, the projected requirements for intensive care capacity.
One of the things that happened over here in the UK, and I was in Scotland in 2020, was it was quite obvious early on that it was a over here at least a power play politically, because Scotland went harder than England and Wales. So Nicola Sturgeon, in all of her wonderful glory, that was sarcastic, she decided that she was going to make it more obvious that she obviously cared more about the people of Scotland than Boris Johnson cared about the people of England, for example. And but the interesting thing about it, watching New Zealand, watching Australia, watching Canada, um, it was that none of it was actually enforced here. It was like you were told that you had to do these things. You were told that you had to stay home. But they didn't really follow through. I mean, when I was still working at the universities in the university system at the time, and we weren't allowed to be going to campus, and the students were stranded in their rooms and all of that. So that was the buildings were locked up and you couldn't do it. But then when we got to 2021 and they started rolling out the uh, medical devices, whatever, injectables, whatever we want to call them,
Injectables. Yeah.
injectables, yeah. It That part was not enforced because I just didn't say anything. There was I didn't fly anywhere. I couldn't fly anywhere, and the real serious consequence that happened for me was that my mother passed away on a ventilator in December of 2021.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and I was not able to go back for her before or after she died because I didn't have any injectables and I wouldn't shove any sticks up my nose to do anything else. So I couldn't even get into my country of origin. So, but within Scotland itself, there was no, unless you were trying to board a plane, there was, and maybe in certain professions where maybe in the NHS you maybe was maybe stricter, but for me, there was nothing that where I had to show proof of it.
Was very different. It
Yeah.
was very different here because everything was very closely and tightly enforced.
Hmm.
Um, the vaccinated who then had it was a digital pass on their phone for most people. Some elderly people who didn't have a smartphone would have a paper pass, but for the vast majority, it was a digital pass. And you scanned into premises, shops and cinemas and everything. And there was always a guard or somebody on the door to ensure that you scanned in. And if you broke lockdown rules or, you went swimming or you're on the beach, all of those places were surveilled. The police would pick you up. They would issue a fine, unless you're in some extremely remote part of New Zealand in the Wop Wops. If you're on a beach in Auckland, the police would come and speak to you and issue a fine. So it was difficult to bend the rules here.
Right. Then that's what I observed from a distance. So, it's unfortunate but interesting to hear when I've heard from people who were actually in those settings that was really enforced, because we would see these sort of clips on social media of just a family minding their own business on the beach, and then all of a sudden they're being arrested and everyone is terrified, and you know
Yeah, I would say that the Australian response was even more physically aggressive. The Australian police turned out, in general, except for the terrible events that happened at the Parliament grounds occupation that you're probably aware of,
Yeah.
what we call Freedom Village, that ended, as a virtual bloodbath with a lot of people being injured by the police response. Except for that, generally the Australian physical brutality was greater. Not many people were assaulted with truncheons if they were, on the beach breaking the lockdown rules, whereas in Australia, that happened. A lot of people were actually physically assaulted when they refused to comply with, lockdown events. So it was more physically aggressive in Australia than New Zealand, except for the Freedom Village response.
Yeah. I was living within the city of Glasgow with in this time period. And one of the things that I think was interesting, and I don't know if it's because Nicola Sturgeon lives in Glasgow or what it was, but that was actually stricter than even in the rest of Scotland, and Scotland was stricter than England, right? So they said you can't more than 5 miles away from your house, as though if you went 6 miles away from your house, you would die of COVID. But 5 miles from your house, you were fine. And so I made it was just my personal way of protesting every week. I went to buy my groceries at a place that was 6 miles away, just so that I could prove that I wasn't going to die of COVID because I
Oh my
drove
gosh.
a mile to get to my grocery shopping. But um, and there were the thing that was the interesting thing part of here, and I'm wondering if I don't know if this what they had here was the track and trace system that the government, the NHS in turn, of course, spent millions on, where you were supposed to, once you were so-called allowed to go into a pub or, eat something in a restaurant, that you could, you were supposed to check in and scan a QR code and say, yes, I'm here, and all of this. And the first few times when I started to see my friends again, go out to places, and they were all doing it. And I was at that point where I stayed quiet, and that was my survival mechanism up to a certain point, because I had so many friends who bought into the whole thing, and I was actually afraid to say anything for a while, just socially. I've kind of lost these friends since then, because eventually I just gave up and quit trying. But I remember doing things like checking my emails on my phone, pretending I was checking in, but actually I was just answering a text message or something, because I was just trying to play along.
Yeah, we had exactly the same system. This is what's so interesting. If you talk to somebody in America or Canada or all of the developed Western nations, we all had the same playbook. And we also had the QR code scan in with the track and trace system. And you'd have a bizarre experience like, if there was a case of COVID in Kmart, which is like a huge department store, and your track and trace showed that you'd been in the store at the same time. You might have been on a different floor, and you might have been in the store, for 2 minutes and nowhere near the person, but then you were basically put on mandatory lockdown in your home for the period of time got shorter as the months went by. But I think to begin with, it may have been, I can't remember, but I think it might have been 10 days. This is after the actual lockdowns. But if you had the misfortune of, your track and trace system showing that you're in Kmart when one person with COVID was in Kmart, that was it. You were on mandatory basically house arrest for 10 days. Over the years, the amount of mandatory time you had to stay home did decrease. But it was outrageous. It caused mayhem for people and their lives and businesses, because suddenly, lockdowns were finished, you finally got your business open again, and then you had the misfortune of being pinged by a track and trace and you were back home again.
That sounds so stressful. I mean, I can't imagine like living under that kind of uncertainty. Like, uncertainty is hard to live with anyway in any situation, and considering what we're living under, but not knowing if will I be allowed to leave the house tomorrow? It sounds like a child who was bad and the parents grounded them for coming home too late or something.
Absolutely. And we all had a national system. What was it called? A civil defense alert system. I don't know if you have them. We all have them on our smartphones.
Oh, I've turned mine off. Yeah.
Right. And so when when it was decided, usually the lockdowns were decided and they started at midnight that night. Literally, they would decide, they would announce like in the 1 o'clock press briefing, Auckland or New Zealand is going into lockdown for 7 days or 10 days or 2 weeks, starting at midnight tonight. And we'd get the civil defence alert on our phone, the alarm and then the notice coming up, as of midnight tonight, Auckland is in lockdown, blah, blah, blah. It was terrifying. And it's interesting that so many of us, I've talked about it on the Health Forum platforms, but so many people have a PTSD response now when that alarm goes off on their phone, because we even get them now for weather warnings, heavy rain warnings, extremely heavy rain warnings, and that alarm will go off on the phone. And we're programmed now into a PTSD response with heart racing and sweating. And yeah, it's the real deal.
So I know that there are settings on my phone that I've found where to turn off. There's like alerts and there's extreme alerts and there's I forget what they're called.
Extreme alerts.
Yeah, it gets like worse and worse, right? So but not everyone. I don't know. Maybe in different countries. I know, like in the UK, that in some cases the phone providers that can only turn on or off certain things, and privacy settings are different in different countries.
I will check it out because I would like to take it off my phone for sure.
Go in and find the settings, and you can switch it off, at least for now, and at least here in this country. But you might have to check on what's going on over there.
Yeah, I
Um,
will.
Yeah, because they what happened was a couple of years ago, I think it was, they announced they were going to do a test of the system, and everyone started passing around messages saying, "Oh, here's where you do it on your phone to turn it off, so that you don't have a panic attack when this happens at a certain time." Here's everyone, right? Yeah. So then we go into 2021, and here in the UK, they started saying, "Well, we're going to start rolling out these injectables." We had people who started they started with what they call the vulnerable, so people over a certain age. So they kind of worked backward from elderly people all the way back down into children eventually, and that's how they did it here. So you were supposed to wait until you were told, your age group can show up, and then you're supposed to go in and get your time booked. So was it the same approach in New Zealand?
Pretty much. So we were about our rollout, our first injection started around the 20th of February, 2021. We have used almost exclusively Pfizer mRNA, about 10,000 AstraZeneca, and even fewer Novavax, and the rest have all been Pfizer mRNA. So that landed and started the rollout towards the end of February 2021. I think the very first people to receive it were actually border workers, airport workers, port workers, and then what we called MIQ, the system where anybody that came into New Zealand was quarantined for 2 weeks in huge hotels. Many of the hotels in New Zealand were commandeered by the government to use as mandatory isolation for anybody coming over the border for 2 weeks. They were literally kept in their rooms for all but 1 hour a day, where they were taken out in small numbers into an enclosed exercise yard. I mean, it was like prison, full on. So workers there and port workers, airport workers were the first people. And then we followed you in that we started with frail elderly, and worked backwards, eventually coming to children, and then last of all, infants from 6 months to 4 years. So our rollout was, I don't know what it was like in England really, but here it was a sight to behold, because the narrative from the government and Jacinda Ardern and the Ministry of Health was that the vaccine was the holy grail and was absolutely the one way we were going to get our lives back. It was without question going to save us. It was our route back to normality. There was never any discussion, any public debate or genuine informed consent process around pros and cons, individual risks and benefits. So, with that being the background, they poured hundreds of millions of dollars into massive infrastructure to roll the injectables out rapidly. At the height of the rollout, remembering that our entire country, we've got about 5.1 million people living here. So we're tiny, compared to UK. But at the height of the rollout, they were administering up to 100,000 doses a week for a tiny country like this, with massive vaxathons, vax hubs. Big sports stadiums were commandeered, massive car parks where you could do drive-through jabs and just pull over for 15 minutes, wind your window down, stick your arm out, pull over and sit for 15 minutes and drive away, to do your shopping. So the obsessive focus with no other discussion, not a single dollar was spent in New Zealand for any public education campaigns to teach people about the connection between obesity and massively increased risk. No money was spent to educate people about the self-help measures they could take in terms of lifestyle or healthy nutrition or sun exposure, vitamin D status and the correlation with their risk. So nobody was taught anything except the vaccine was going to save us and the unvaccinated potentially would kill us. The unvaccinated would kill the vaccinated. Go figure.
I remember that. And I had some people when I finally told a group of people that I was not going to get vaccinated. And like I said, I stayed quiet and just quietly observed, didn't say anything for a while until I started to speak up and share what I was seeing, noticing, because I was also watching UK Column in 2020, right? Before I had the privilege of working for them. But what had happened was eventually I said to a group of friends who were all about the vaccine, and I felt like I had to make a confession to them, and I was afraid of losing their friendships. And I said, I'm not getting vaccinated. And I said that I had actually, and this is true, because this is how I think the doctors knew a lot more than what they said in the start. Because I heard on the news, on UK Column News, and even on the BBC, actually, that there was the BBC downplayed, there was the tiniest, smallest risk of a blood clot if you took the AstraZeneca, right, which was the majority of what they were giving out here in the beginning. I had a DVT in 2013 from another medication from taking hormonal medications for endometriosis. And and I was the 1%. I would say it's the 1% of women who take oral contraceptives that get this. Well, I was the 1%. And I know that once you've had one, you're at higher risk of another one. So first time I heard this, I called my GP and I said, what do you think? Should I take it? This doesn't sound safe for me. I have a lot of risk factors for another blood clot. And he said, no, you are definitely at higher risk of dying of another blood clot than you are of dying from any sort of respiratory illness.
My goodness, you had an honest doctor.
Yeah. And maybe he already knew well enough that I wasn't going to buy into anything else. But, it just showed me that there were some that, whether or not they were honest, they knew. And maybe I'm hoping that they knew, but I'm also disappointed in all of them for going along with it, because over here I think they got 12 pounds per jab administered or something. That was the financial incentives for their practices.
And here, so we had all doctors, vaccinated, pharmacists who were vaccinating. They receive between 38 and 48 New Zealand dollars per jab based on, was it during the day, was it on a weekend, was it on an evening? Many of our pharmacies have become multi-millionaires, and our doctor practices as a result of the COVID windfall for being paid per PCR test, stick up your nose, and per dose for the jab. And our healthcare system is in a complete shambles. I don't know what the NHS is like right now, but our healthcare system appears to be imploding around us for a lot of different reasons. But if we put the hospital system to one side, we have a catastrophic breakdown of trust with New Zealanders, many hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of adult New Zealanders no longer being able to trust their GPs or the doctors in the hospital. And partly that came about because the New Zealand Medical Council issued effectively gag orders to all their members. And this was then followed by all the healthcare registration bodies, including the naturopathic registration, the acupuncture, chiropractors, physiotherapists, dentists, nursing council. They all effectively were gagged and told that they were not allowed to post publicly or speak in consultations anything that instilled doubt or negativity about the safety or the efficacy of the COVID vaccines. And so, as a result of that, very few New Zealanders received a genuine, honest risk benefit appraisal or an informed consent process. And as increasing numbers of New Zealanders have become aware of that, the trust has been irrevocably broken down. And in the Health Forum, our membership, we have a large social media presence for the work that we do across Facebook, X, and Telegram. We've got well over 70,000 members across those platforms, and the vast majority of those members are New Zealanders, and the vast majority of them say they will never again trust a doctor. Many of them have said they're finished with orthodox healthcare and they'd rather die at home than go to a hospital. I mean, they're in very radically entrenched positions of fear and distrust of the medical system in New Zealand as a result of the COVID response here.
Yeah, and NHS is in complete meltdown mode as well, and has been for the past few years. And it's it I'm sure that the issues might be quite similar, where at least here you can't get an appointment for days. You can make call and ask for an appointment, and there's maybe something 3 weeks from then.
Same here. Same
Yeah,
here.
when I was going through that time period when you weren't even allowed to go into a practice, and I have a thyroid condition, I'm supposed to have my bloods monitored. I wasn't even able to get in to get my bloods monitored because they wouldn't let me into the practice to have my bloods taken. And I'm supposed to be in every 6 months. And so the impact of people who had actual health conditions that were impacted on, I mean, mine's not life threatening, but people who had, different cancer diagnoses, things that were not even related to or existed before they might have become vaccine injured, the impact on those people's lives and their health was incredibly substantial, and the NHS is still just breaking down. So that is one similarity over here. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think it's interesting because at UK Column we have said this whole time, and we need to continue to say this, that we will never abandon those who are vaccine injured. And the problem is that a lot of the people over here on the side that have been vaccine injured, who are working hard, who are speaking out, trying to fight for what they've lost, for the people who are already gone, and for the people who are permanently disabled from what happened to them. It's absolutely devastating to see what happens, and they feel completely lost and without any help. So we do what we can. We're a small team, and there are very few media outlets over here or anywhere that are willing to speak about this. And and this is where I would like to maybe even started talking about the health forum. So if maybe you can give the audience a little bit of background to the health forum, kind of where in all of this madness it started and what it started from and kind of what to do with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, having explained a little about my background, 35 years in healthcare as a practitioner myself, plus a freelance health researcher and journalist. So, um, I was equipped to see the red flags, some of which we've already talked about. And when the Pfizer mRNA landed in New Zealand, to overwhelming fanfare and cheerleading from the New Zealand government and jubilation from the vast majority of the New Zealand population, believing it was the Holy Grail and it had finally arrived. I thought I was the odd one out because I had all kinds of concerns. Because in that year of 2020, I'd been following the development, I'd been researching the history of mRNA and lipid nanoparticles, and I knew that prior to Pfizer and Moderna deciding that this was the platform they were going to use to roll out to, potentially 7 billion human beings around the planet. Prior to that, decade-long history of mRNA was that they'd never been able to bring a successful commercial product to market because of the fraught risk-benefit profile of the product. And up until using it for a global rollout, it had only ever been used for individual care, often for people with terminal cancer, where they were going to die anyway. So if they died from mRNA toxicity or harm, well, they were already going to die. Such was the risk benefit, basis. So the more I learned about the platform and the more I learned about the troublesome nature of lipid nanoparticles, the fact that they traverse the body, the fact that they cross all the cellular membranes and the blood-brain barrier, and they're highly inflammatory, I became increasingly concerned about this product that was coming to New Zealand. I started watching the government pharmacovigilance databases, Yellow Card, VAERS in America. And because I'd looked at those pharmacovigilance databases for other genuine vaccines in the past, I quickly saw what I thought was a difference. The severity of a lot of the reports, the multi-system nature of them, the immediate obvious cardiac effects that were being, reported. So I had my red alert buttons going. And I consoled myself with the belief that once it landed in New Zealand, people who were genuinely, academically qualified to speak out about this subject would do so. The immunologists, the vaccinologists, the doctors with 40 years of experience, they obviously must be sharing my concern. So the product landed, the rollout started, I waited and I waited. Nobody was saying anything. The doctors were silent. I don't know what your tagline was in UK, but our marketing tagline, 24 hours a day, literally on every media platform, written, TV, radio, was a three-word tagline: safe and effective. Safe and effective. Was it the same in UK?
It was safe and
Yeah,
effective.
safe and effective. So people started lining up for the jabs. Still nobody spoke out. And one day, probably 3 months into the rollout, I was so frustrated that I decided I would start a Facebook group where I could start posting my observation from pharmacovigilance databases and some of the early preprint science that was starting to come out, and some of the early overseas experts that were starting to, speak up. Tess, I can't remember exactly at what point, but the wonderful Tess Laurie, for example, in UK, and the American cardiologists, Peter McCullough, they were, and Robert Malone, they were, early voices of expertise that started speaking out. So I started this Facebook group called the Health Forum NZ. I thought maybe 1,000 people would join me to see what I was talking about. Actually, what happened was 58,000 people joined me. All but 5,000 of them were New Zealanders, because on Facebook you can actually monitor the demographics of where people have joined from. We lasted for 9 months in our original iteration. Our 58,000 member group lasted 9 months before one night we were just deplatformed overnight by Facebook. I'll give you some reason why. Our membership, of course, when I started the process, it was very academic, and I was thinking of it being quite an academic process. You know, we could analyze things, I could share the science. I never really stopped to think on that day when I set the group up that, of course, what was going to happen in New Zealand was what was already happening in Israel and America and UK. We were going to have vaccine injured people. And sure enough, the collateral damage started to build up. There was no safe place for those people in New Zealand. They were completely shunned and abandoned, as they are to this very day. They were completely ignored by the government, by the legacy media, by their doctors, who gaslighted them and refused to believe that the safe and effective could possibly have harmed them in any way. So where was the one safe place they could find? Well, it turned out it was actually the Health Forum NZ, a virtual community, a closed Facebook group. And they joined us in their thousands. And then by November 2021, we had some of the strictest employment mandates, COVID vaccine employment mandates, some of the strictest and most far-reaching in the world. 40% of our employed workforce across many professions were mandated to take 2 or 3 Pfizer mRNA to keep their jobs. And so many of those people who lost their careers, their professions, their homes, their marriages, their mana, they lost it all. They joined us as well. And so we became a deeply traumatized community, where we offered compassion, support. We cultivated non-judgmentalism, which we do to this day. We worked hard to be bridge builders, to try to bring back the vaccinated, the unvaccinated, the injured, the non-injured, to try to build compassion and understanding in the face of military-grade psychological operations, working with budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars to do the exact opposite, to drive wedges in marriages, families, workplaces, to scapegoat the unvaccinated and have them cast aside, in order to drive uptake of the mRNA product. So we became that safe place. It was madness. I can honestly say that first 9 months was the most intense time of my life. At our height, we had about 40 people working for the Health Forum. None of us get any money to this day. We're all volunteers. We don't have any sponsorship other than the occasional kind person that sees the donate button on our website. We don't have any corporate sponsors or government sponsors. And so we did what we could for that community. And over that time, I know UK Column News experienced it as well. The censorship was ferocious. And so it was the censorship that finally took our group down, because we were telling the truth. We were speaking the truth, not the propaganda. We were sharing real stories of, brutally injured and maimed people from the safe and effective. We were sharing stories of people whose children had died in New Zealand from the injection, or, their mother had died. And we were also sharing the preprint and then the peer-reviewed science. My voice was brutally muted, so I would get rolling back-to-back 1 month bans. And when my actual voice was unlocked. I'd often last 24 hours, being so careful what I posted. I'd last 24 hours before they put me back in a 1 month ban for things like early on in our membership, we spotted what we thought was an early signal for myocarditis. Long before anybody was talking about it publicly, we asked our members about myocarditis and cardiac events. What were they witnessing? What was happening to them? And so I started writing about it, saying, hey, this is unprecedented. What's all this cardiac stuff that's happening? That was a 1 month ban. I got a 1 month ban for publishing a peer-reviewed paper which documented the now widely accepted fact that vitamin D status has a lot to do with your risk of, infection, hospitalization, and death. That was a 1 month ban. Another 1 month ban was for talking about the early signal again that I thought I detected in our thousands strong membership for female menstrual disorders. Of course, the myocarditis and the female menstrual mayhem is now mainstream. It's now acknowledged as they are serious adverse events with COVID injectables. So it was just a crazy time working with a deeply traumatized population. So within that, we had our social media group. I was receiving, at the height of that, up to 500 private messages a day, PMs through our Facebook page. I had a team of people who were literally just knocking off all the ones they could, all the ones that were just like a video link being sent, and then forwarding to me the desperate pleas for help, and they would be still 100 to 200 people a day. And I would try and respond to those as best as I could. So we're back on Facebook. We're actually thriving on Facebook now. We're called True Stories from the Health Forum NZ. We're growing very rapidly, and Facebook are being very kind to us now. We've got a large reach. We've got about 3 million views a month currently on Facebook for our work. So come join us if you want to see what we're doing. And besides the social media, we actively help and support mRNA harmed New Zealanders. So we direct them to healthcare. We have a sadly very short database of doctors and specialists who are not gaslighting the vaccinated. And so we help people find their way to those practitioners. We help them find advocates for accident compensation applications. So that's our compensation system, supposedly, for vaccine injuries. We help them find lawyers for employment cases. We send them resources. We also guide a lot of them to the small group of New Zealand doctors, amazing doctors, New Zealand doctors speaking out with science. NZDSOS, that is the organisation of honest doctors who have made it their business to research and find solutions for mRNA harm. So we're very busy to this day, and we've become a primary voice in New Zealand for the mRNA harmed New Zealanders, of which there are thousands. And they're still gaslighted, they're still ignored, and they're still silenced by legacy media.
It's the exact same over here. I know that you've done an incredible amount of work. Are there any other people that are working with you on this team that you would like to mention and kind of their roles as well? Because you can't possibly be doing all of this alone.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. Yes, there are. Our team is a lot smaller than it was at the heyday of that busy group. But one of the things so I have amazing moderators who I couldn't run the Facebook page without them. So that's Lisa and Karen. They're really hardworking and they're incredible. And one of the things we've been doing for 3 years, we quickly became the repository for people sharing their personal stories with us of serious injectable harm. And we realized quite early on that this was really special information and we needed to do something with it. And so we established what we call a citizens database of serious adverse events and deaths. And so we started with quite a large team, predominantly mandated out nurses. That team has got smaller over time because we have fewer reports coming through now, because fewer people are taking new doses. But we still have a team of mandated out healthcare professionals headed by a nurse, collecting first-person reports, very detailed first-person reports of harm or the families of those who have died. And we have hundreds and hundreds of those reports, which we have anonymised and submitted as part of our submission to the New Zealand Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID response. So incredible team right at the coalface, listening to deep trauma and reading about it all day, every day. So deeply grateful for that team. We've also along the way had ACC advisors working with us. We've had lawyers working with us. We don't so much have in-house lawyers and ACC advocates now, but we do have an out-of-house network that we work with and who support us. So yeah, and then we of course have the moderators on our other platforms as well. So still an amazing team of volunteers.
So we have all these inquiries going on in different countries now, right? So there's the Scottish COVID inquiry. My group that I'm on the executive committee for, called Common Knowledge Edinburgh, a few months ago, we had what we called the Scottish People's COVID inquiry.
Yes, I followed that.
Yeah.
Video clips on Twitter.
Yeah, I did a presentation there about the fear in the media campaign, and we had some amazing speakers with Dr. Liz Evans and a whole program of experts in their areas on the topic. And so what we wanted to do is actually give people a voice, and we had a great turnout and people who came and shared their personal stories. What's been unique about the Scottish COVID inquiry is that you have to go far into the website to find it, but all of these recordings of people who are coming in and sharing their stories about, what happened to them or to their family members at the time, that whether or not they act on all of this evidence, but the stories that people came in and told, both in the official documented government inquiry as well as on our own inquiry through Common Knowledge, have been incredible. And I know that you've just put together a huge submission for the inquiry in New Zealand. If you maybe want to talk a little bit about that and what was all involved in that, because I can't imagine the amount of work that was done for that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. So we're a bit different in New Zealand because we've already had a supposed inquiry, Royal Commission of Inquiry into the New Zealand COVID response. Under the previous government, the Jacinda Ardern, the Labour government, we had well, it was actually after Jacinda Ardern, but it was still the Labour government. We had a COVID inquiry that had incredibly narrow terms of reference. And those terms of reference didn't include anything about vaccines, if you can believe that. Not a thing. The primary New Zealand response to the COVID, to the pandemic situation was the vaccine, mRNA, and the Royal Commission of Inquiry just picked the carpet up and went, swept it all in and dropped the dusty carpet down. So as a result of that, when we had the elections for the new government, I don't know, I think approximately 18 months ago, many of us pushed very hard with one party in particular, New Zealand First. We pushed very hard petitioning that party to campaign on a party promise of pushing for a second Royal Commission of Inquiry with more realistic terms of reference. So, with a big focus on safety and efficacy of the injectables, and with a big focus on employment mandates, vaccine employment mandates. And we actually have a three-way coalition government, and you know, one of that three-way government is NZ First. And so they came in and they did exactly that. They bargained with the other two parties, and we now have a second Royal Commission of Inquiry with much broader terms of reference. And in this, we are allowed to speak about safety and efficacy. So, given that we're allowed to speak about safety, the Health Forum has spent a lot of our enormous submission speaking about the lack of safety. We're the number one organisation in New Zealand, along with New Zealand Doctors Speaking Out with Science, speaking about injury and death with the injectables. So a lot of our submission focuses on that particular area, and jointly focuses on the ongoing harms from the consequences of employment mandates, injection employment mandates. So this phase two of the inquiry, we have new commissioners. One of our concerns with phase one of the inquiry, the lead commissioner, many people had serious doubts about conflicts of interest with that particular person, Tony Blakely. He had been headhunted by Jacinda Ardern. He was an advisor to Dan Andrews in Victoria in Australia. He was also an advisor to the New Zealand COVID response. So he was very conflicted, and he was the leader of the first Commission of Inquiry. This time round, we have three new commissioners, none of whom appear to have any obvious conflicts of interest. And I have much greater hopes for honesty and transparency with the findings in phase two. So we have, it's a very short inquiry. It's 1 year long. Or no, it's about 14 months. The findings will be published in February next year. The New Zealand public had, I think it was just short of 3 months. The public had the opportunity to make their own submission, as did organisations such as the Health Forum. The portal for making submissions closed about 4 weeks ago now. And the next phase is, it's sort of being revealed as it goes along. It's almost like it's being constructed just ahead of the announcements. And so one of the phases that was just announced this week is there is going to be a 2-week period where they will be live streamed public interviews, public statements, speakers, perhaps myself, NZDSOS, other experts in New Zealand, and that will be live streamed. Unfortunately, it appears it's only 2 weeks of the entire process that is going to be made visible in a live way. And so whether other interviews are made into clips that are then shared later, I don't know. That hasn't been announced. The commissioners have confirmed that they will be meeting with me as a representative of New Zealand, injectable harmed and mandated people. And I have written to them now several times requesting that there can be no worthwhile and open and transparent inquiry without them making serious accommodation for meeting with many injured people. It's no use just talking to me. They need to hear from the people who are living with disabilities and hear about what's happened to them. So I've got my foot on the pedal with that, and I'm very hopeful that will happen.
So how are you feeling about any potential outcomes from the results of this inquiry? Because I have to admit that I'm not overly optimistic about the ones happening here. How are you feeling about it at this point? Because considering the size of your submission and the potential opportunity for people to actually speak out, do you think that there will be a good outcome?
I'm an unusual um, maelstrom of conflicting feelings about that. On the one hand, the way that I sustain myself in this work and I keep going is I try to retain hope uh, and faith that ultimately truth and justice will prevail. If I don't keep that faith in the face of seemingly exactly the opposite, I grind to a halt. I can only sustain this work spiritually and emotionally with that that concept present in my mind and my heart. And then the other side of that, the little thing sitting on my shoulder is, well, look at the evidence, look at what has happened so far and what continues to happen. So, I've got this push-pull thing inside of me. And so that applies to my feelings about the Royal Commission inquiry as well. I don't envy the task of the commissioners. I think they were not at all prepared for the data and the information that has been laid in front of them. In phase one of the inquiry under the last government, they received a total of 13,000 public submissions, remembering we're a tiny country. In phase two, 48 hours before the public submission portal closed, so at lunchtime on the Friday, the lead commissioner did a media interview in which he shared that they had received 7,500 public submissions. In the next 48 hours before the closing of the portal, the Health Forum, New Zealand Doctors Speaking Out with Science, another big platform called Reality Check Radio, another big platform called Voices for Freedom, we all worked together to work up a frenzy on social media with just manic posting, endless lives. And when we closed, when the public submission portal closed 48 hours after the 7,500, we closed with 31,000 public submissions. So as a result of our social media frenzy, we went from 7,500 to 31,000 in just over 48 hours, because we just stressed over and over again that we had asked for this opportunity to be heard. The Vax Injured had been begging for an opportunity to be heard. And then when they finally got that opportunity, they were so disillusioned, so downtrodden, so exhausted by just living through the last 4 years, so disbelieving that anything could change or anybody would listen to them, that they didn't take the opportunity. And so there was a lot of psychology and support and cheerleading went into 48 hours. And so we were absolutely thrilled. 31,000. Many of those are injured and mandated out people. The commissioners were knocked off their feet. They weren't prepared for that. They've had to expand their inquiry team. And I don't believe that they will have been in any way prepared for the raw brutality of thousands of the public submissions they have received. And I know what's in those submissions because many of them have come from the Health Forum, thousands of them. And most of those people have also sent them to me. They've sent them to the Royal Commission inquiry and sent them to me to be held in a database as well. So we have a permanent record of those submissions. So I've read them, thousands of them. And I know what has flooded through that portal. I can guarantee you that those commissioners were not expecting those submissions. So what happens as a result of that? Time will tell. We'll know by February. I don't envy their position. I literally pray. I have a faith, and I literally pray that they will find the strength, the courage, and the resolve to do what is right, to seek justice, to speak truth, to be the bridge builders and the voices of reason, to start repairing the social fabric in New Zealand, which appears to be irrevocably harmed. We're a very, very fractured society as a result of the New Zealand COVID response. And as I pointed out to the commissioners on more than one occasion in writing, they are in an incredibly privileged and rare position to start that healing through their honesty.
Yeah, thanks for that. We'll have to wait and see. As with all of these inquiries, I know the one in Scotland and other ones are much longer than yours.
Mm,
And Scotland is about the same size population-wise as New Zealand, around 5 million people.
yeah.
So we'll see what happens. We're just about out of time, unfortunately, but I just want to cover one last point, which I know is difficult, but I think it needs to be covered and it's not covered enough, is that UK Column has been through this. I believe you've been through this. Everyone fighting for freedom and truth is going through this, that for some reason, those of us in this movement tend to, for whatever reason, either fall victim to or begin the process of trying to cancel each other, right? So we say, oh, well, we can't trust him. And there's may not even be a real valid reason behind it, or it's irrational, or it's, why are you saying this? We're all trying to fight for the same thing. And why are you taking sides against people on your own side?
It's a trauma response. It's a well-known psychological feature. It's a trauma response.
And I think this is something that we need to be aware of, because there's so few of us that are speaking out, that those of us who maybe we have some political differences, or maybe we have a different way of seeing something, but ultimately we're all trying to fight for autonomy. We're all trying to fight for the freedom to live as we know that we should be able to live as human beings on this planet, and that we all need to find a way to work together. And I'm seeing this trauma response, as you called it, and I think you've rightfully labeled it that it's going to hurt us if we're not aware of it, if we don't face it, if we don't deal with it, and we start to realize that maybe we have to, maybe if you are taking the worldview that you can't trust anybody, you have to at least trust that we're all trying to do the right things and not make up things in your head. And I'm seeing this over and over again. And I'm saying this because everyone in this movement has experienced it. I don't do it myself, but a lot of places are doing it. And I just want to put this out there, that as we continue to fight this over the next few years, however long it takes until we get our freedoms back, that we need to stop doing what we're doing and realize that we're really all on the same side. And we can't be taking sides against people on our same side, because it is completely irrational and illogical. So I just would like you to see if you have any comments on that as we start to wrap up.
100% Diane, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. I have steered a very cautious ship. I mean, it is my nature anyway, but I have been very careful to steer my own ship, to stay solely in control of the modus operandi of the Health Forum, the values, the integrity of our organization. And right from the beginning, I was aware that if I sort of joined with other organizations in some structured way or official way, I would lose control of the values and the persona of our organization and the work we do. And so I have kept very much our organization stands alone, is what I'm trying to say. But I have great relationships with all of the other amazing organizations in New Zealand who, are fighting for truth and freedom and justice for all the harmed people in New Zealand. I work alongside them separately. The Health Forum can bring something to the table. Many of them are now my friends. And perhaps as a result of that and a result of the culture that we've worked very, very hard to develop in the Health Forum, I've been incredibly lucky to not actually be the target of any other. I have not been a victim of vitriol from other freedom groups in New Zealand. I I love it. I'm very thankful for that. I have been the target from many non-freedom groups who, call me an anti-vax loon, a cooker, a conspiracy theorist. None of that worries me at all. What would worry me more is if I had torn relationships with the other freedom groups, and I'm very lucky that I don't. I've got great relationships with all of them. And I wholeheartedly agree that it's vital in this world where, you know, enormous, wealthy, well-funded forces are doing everything they can to make the voice of truth and reason disappear. It's essential that we coalesce, that we trust each other and support each other and work as, a pincer movement, one force going forward. So yeah, 100% agree with you, Diane.
Thanks for that. It's such an important point that we can't let ourselves get fractured. So is there any other final comments, insights, things that you would like to say before we end up? Because I realize it's getting very late at night, your time, as we record this.
Okay, well, a few things. So I think we can clearly say 5 years after, the announcement of the pandemic, we can clearly say that this is still an evolving situation. After several years of all information being suppressed and censored and locked away in cupboards everywhere, we're on a roll. Globally, we're on a roll. Just so much information is coming out, partly as a result of the Royal Commissions of Inquiry. I'm absolutely ecstatically happy about what is happening in America with the new HHS Secretary, FDA, CDC, the new promised transparency. I can't understand why they haven't already removed the mRNA injectables. But just putting that to one side, I think so much more awareness and information is going to come out from America. So we're very much in an evolving situation. And I think that the dominoes of truth are going to begin falling with increasing rapidity. And the other thing is self-care, right? Because this is a marathon, not a sprint. I don't know about you, but I started out for the first 2 years, perhaps 3 years, treating it as a sprint, thinking it's going to be over soon. We're nearly at the finish line and burning all the resources I had. And now I realize it's a marathon, and to sustain this kind of work, we have to pace ourselves and we have to care for ourselves. So I'm trying to practice that more now. And the other thing I would say, I don't know where you are on this. People have got differing opinions, but I have spiritual beliefs. I have faith that sustains me, and I really believe that we are living through spiritual warfare, and we're living through a time where the fight between light and dark, or good and evil, however you want to perceive it, the fight that's always been there is being revealed all at once. So many areas of corruption and injustice and evil are being revealed in so many different directions, not just COVID connected or injectable connected. Power structures, I believe, will topple. And I think personally, we're going to see a lot more mayhem in the years to come, in maybe 2 to 5 years, before something new grows from it. So it feels like we're very much in the stormy seas right now, and we will sail through to calmer water and perhaps a world that we can't yet predict or quantify. I think we have to wait and see what's coming while continuing to fight for truth and justice and transparency.
It is definitely a fight between light and dark. And Brian Gerrish talks about this so well, that we are in a spiritual battle. And those of us who are fighting it do feel it. I know I get the heaviness from it from time to time. And I
Me
really have to,
too.
yeah, I have to work hard to fight back on it. And because whatever this thing is, whoever, different people have different ways of expressing spirituality and faith and religion, but whatever this thing is very heavy, and it comes after those of us who are aware of it and trying to stay on the light side. But I want to encourage everyone to not give up, because if more of us work together, I still believe, I say this all the time, if we work locally, as you are in your country, as I am in my country, work locally, that's the only way we're going to fight this. And we all have to stand up and do something in whatever way we can to fight. To
Absolutely.
maybe
Absolutely.
you can't organize thousands of people possibly as you have, Lynda, but everyone can do something small in their local communities. And the more that we do, the more they're going to be able to say, we can't fight against this many people, especially if they're going to be getting more and more submissions into your inquiry, or whatever this ends up looking like wherever we are in the world. So I just want to end with that bit of encouragement for everyone to try to stand up in whatever way. And the more that we divide each other, the less likely it is that we're going to be successful fighting these evil spirits in the end. So I want to thank you again, Lynda, for your time. I also want to thank everyone in New Zealand and everyone down there in Australia, anywhere, in whatever part of the world you're in. Thank you to those of us who work hard here in the UK. And it's always really inspirational to hear that our messages are getting out around the world as well, as we continue to expose everything that's going on. So thank you to those of you. Thank you for Lynda for supporting UK Column over this time. Thank you for your support. And everyone, if you get up and watch us at 1 p.m. UK time in the middle of the night in New Zealand, which I hope you don't, I hope you watch us on playback, but if you do, I know some people do. Thank you all again. This is Diane Rasmussen McAdie with UK Column News. I've just had a really interesting conversation here with Lynda Wharton from the Health Forum. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, John. My absolute pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and thank you, UK Column News. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.